Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Devil's Advocate podcast. I hope everyone's having a lovely Friday evening. I'm hosting the show for the first time, so guys, have plenty of patience with me tonight. If I start randomly pulling up tweets from Johnny FX and Mark Aldridge, it's my first day. It's a mistake, so have some patience. Look, I'm happy to say I'm joined with three guys who I'm sure will have no problem filling any empty space with some avid Manchester United chat tonight. So I'm delighted to be joined by Julio, Nathan, and John. Gents, I hope you're all doing well. Julio, I haven't been on with you for a while. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Busy. You know how it is.
Absolutely. John, how are you keeping, my friend?
Yeah, I'm just sending a tweet out to everyone. Can we get a win before the international break? Man United versus Brentford. Come and join me as I try and join the land of positivity away from the usual podcasting I do on tennis. But of course, this might not be. This is not quite the land of positivity that I was hoping it would be 8 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm half considering starting to follow the tennis myself. This club is slowly killing me inside at this point. Nathan, how are you doing, pal? I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, no, I'm good, mate. Yeah, really good. Yeah, I'm sharing the same sentiment. I'm at the point now where Saturdays used to be really exciting. The football's back, Premier, and it's like ready to be disappointed again. But fingers crossed, maybe we'll see something different.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think we're all at a point now. It's just kind of like this has to end somewhere. It's just gotten so bad now that we just hope that every defeat brings us closer to that next victory, isn't it? It's that sort of thing. So, look, gents, we look briefly back at the Galatasaray game the other night. I know it's not something we want to dwell on too long. I know Julia was on the show the other night looking at the Galatasaray review and just thinking about it there today. I think it's very hard to analyze Manchester United games in isolation these days because you can't just sit back and look at a few mistakes that are happening on the field. It tends to be a bigger problem that just seems to be enveloping the club at the minute. So, look, I mean, there's not too many positives to take out again, but there was a couple, the likes of Rasmus Højlund and Mason Mount, I thought played very well. And there were more negatives than positives, as there tends to be watching Manchester United these days. But, Julia, I'll start with you. What did you think of that game, the performance, the result the other night? Is there many positives that we can take from it into tomorrow's game against Brentford, or is it just all negativity at the moment?
I mean, since that evening, I've tried not to think about it because it was a very complicated game to think about. You know, at the moment, it seems like we're in a chasm between what we've been accustomed to playing for the last 10 years and what Ten Hag's eventual image of what we're supposed to be is. And we're in that kind of blip in the middle where we're trying to learn it in a short space of time. And it's almost like it looks like sometimes we're using match days to learn it. And I think there was a lot of positives from that evening, like even Højlund aside. You know, there were some players who had good games, but I just think that it's like you said, we can't look at it in isolation because there's just so many, I wouldn't say negatives, but for example, we lost that game because whilst we looked good, we brought it on ourselves a little bit. Like we couldn't hold a lead. We just kept getting cut open easily. You know, there was just individual mistakes. You know, Onana gave the ball away so easily for that penalty. Granted, it wasn't scored, but with them, we went a man down. Then you had obviously Onana getting chips almost far too easily for Galatasaray's last goal. But we're coming into a game where we're in a period now where every game's a must win. And we've seen periods like this before. We saw this in Ollie's second full season, you know, for a couple of months after we lost 6-1 to Spurs. We saw this in Louis' second season where just people would say we've got no style of play or there is uncertainty about what we're trying to do. So, you know, it's clear that the pattern is we're trying to develop a style of play, but we're just caught up in the middle of that in the middle of the season. And we could finish 7th this season and our play style could improve from what it was last season. That's the weird thing about it. I thought we'd see this last season. But we're coming into a game now against a team who are also not in great form either. So you'd hope that we've come away with something, but we've got it in our locker to balls it up as a draw, to be honest. So I don't know. It's really uncertain at the moment, but not in a negative way where it questions the manager's future, more like we don't know what we're going to get going into a game.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. John, you're the man with the lingo and the words here. Give us some positivity around these Man United performances at the minute, because we look at guys like Marcus Rashford, Bruno Fernandes. These are guys that are world class talents. These are the guys that are supposed to be leading this revolution under Ten Hag. But ironically, they're our most out of form players at the minute. I mean, like, what would you do at the minute yourself? Would you stick with them, try and play them back into form, or is it a case now of putting that firework up the backside and dropping them?
I know there's a temptation to drop them, but actually, I wrote up my 11 choices for tomorrow, and both of them do feature. Partly because of the formation, I think was the right one to go for, which is maybe the diamond in midfield, which means obviously you're going to go for 4 centralish players, and if Bruno doesn't feature amongst them, then things are even worse. Plus, it was probably only 4 or 5 weeks ago, the first 3 or 4 matches of the season, when there were some stats coming out about Bruno being the most creative player in the Premier League, albeit just sort of 3 or 4 games in. There was talk about, him being in a similar category to De Bruyne, etc. So it has gone sour pretty quickly, but Bruno is far from the main issue. And in fact, I could point to the main issue, and I think this is a reason for optimism, it is just simply the absences. Now, actually, the bigger issue we know is the ownership and all sorts of other things, a crumbling stadium and neglect. Yes, of course. But let's just focus on the performances this season on the pitch. Most of those have been the ones that have been not great, or the issues have been largely down to having 3 left backs all out, having no Martinez for most of, a significant period now. Shaw has been absent, I think, for almost every match, bar maybe Wolves. I don't think he played against Spurs in the second Premier League game, if I'm right. Malacia has been out as well, who would be the next option there. We've got Wan-Bissaka out, who I do think his reputation is growing with every match that Dalot plays. So I think, with the exception of Man City, and I'm not even sure Man City would cope with these kind of absences, and would probably have lost 1 or 2 more games, and they would be the ones in crisis if we had a much more closer to fully fit squad to choose from. We've also had absences in midfield. Mason Mount has not really played anywhere near as much as we would have liked. I think he's started 2 or maybe 3 Premier League games because of the injury that he had. Højlund came in, and it took him 2 or 3 weeks before he was ready and match fit, if you like. So many asterisks, if you like. And I would add that I thought we were unlucky to lose at Spurs. I thought we were unlucky to lose against Arsenal. I actually still think we were unlucky to lose against Bayern. Bayern maybe had dominated for 20 minutes, but we were on top until they scored, which does bring me to one of the negatives. We are flaky. And as soon as we lost that first goal to Bayern, it's like there's going to be another one come pretty quickly afterwards. And the flakiness, of course, is a concern, I think, and this is a broader concern for Ten Hag and the club as well, because in 15 months, I think we've made immense progress, or we did last season under Ten Hag, and he gets a big tick, and we probably need at least a bad year under him before I start to think about his position. At the moment, we've just had a bad few weeks. But I can point to some flakiness. We saw it on Tuesday against Galatasaray, going down to 10 men. We get the lifeline of the penalty miss, but it was just a stay of execution. I saw flakiness as well in other performances this season, perhaps against Palace and definitely against Brighton. And we saw flakiness as well last season in that 7-0 loss to that lot down the M62. So we've seen flakiness, and it's a problem, because I think I'm old enough to remember Ferguson and all that stuff. And in let's look at 20 years of pretty much unbroken success, there was almost no flakiness. We may have lost 6-1 at home to Man City, but that wasn't down to flakiness. That was talking of words. Here's a nice one for you. That was down to overzealousness. It was a keenness to, and a belief that despite being 3-1 down with 10 men, we were going to get back into it. Or once we got 3-1, because I think Fletcher got a goal and so on and so forth. So that's the negativity, at least on the pitch, that I would be worried about as a broader issue. I was worried about it after that Liverpool loss, because I was thinking, losing 2-0, 3-0, even 4, if you like, is one thing, but just going, I can't be bothered for the last half an hour was as a deeper concern and a wider malaise. But I do think that just one more thing, by the way, about positivity. Sorry, Nathan, because I'm sure Nathan's got some stuff to add. But I was looking at some of our strikers in the last sort of 15. Actually, I even go back further than that. I've actually added Gary Birtles, which is someone even before my time. But I'm looking at I've written down 4 or 5 strikers that we've signed over the last sort of 40 years. And I've written down Gary Birtles, started badly and never got any better. Berbatov started quite badly. I would say his first season, despite winning the league, had a little purple patch at the beginning of his second season, but that was it. The ones that started well just got better and better and better. And they were Ruud van Nistelrooy and Wayne Rooney. And so what I'm seeing from Rasmus Højlund already, I just don't see this guy being a flop. Bearing in mind we've had 10 years where, with the exception of Bruno and maybe 1 or 2 of the signings since Ten Hag came in, they've all been flops. And we've spent hundreds of millions on flops. So, yeah, some positivity there to clutch onto.
Yeah, you make some great points there. I mean, you mentioned something I mentioned on the show I was on 2 weeks ago with a couple of the lads. That was that just when things are bad, we're not getting the fine margin, the small decisions going against us, like that offside against Arsenal. It's a half a yard separating a 3-1 defeat to a massive 3 points away from home. And the Brighton result, I know Brighton did outplay us, they could have won by more, but we get that goal just before half time, it changes the dynamic of the game. And they're the kind of fine margin decisions that just tend to go against you when you're down and look. And that's certainly the case at United. It doesn't rain but it pours. And I completely agree as well with the left back situation. It's an unheard of situation that you lose your 2 left backs in Malacia and Shaw, bring in emergency left back, and then he gets out injured as well. And if you remember, I think when Ten Hag paid 54 million for Martinez last summer, there was kind of some shock because there was other priority areas, but he'd done his analysis and said most of United's goal concessions in the previous seasons had come from that left-hand side of defence. So he's obviously seen something there. And the last few games with Amrabat there, I think, I've proven that. I've proven it right, and he's kind of been shown to the Wolves as well. But Nathan, I'll come to you on some of the positives from the other day, and look where John ended there with Rasmus Højlund. I mean, he was kind of slow to start, which is completely understandable. He came in with a bad back injury, a young guy, changing countries, changing cultures. We don't know what kind of language barrier there's still there as well. But he's starting to find his feet now, and there's no doubt that Tuesday night was his most impressive night in a United shirt. How exciting does this guy look?
Yeah, I think he's definitely put his mark on his playing style on Tuesday night. He definitely was the shining star of that entire game. It was such a disappointing game where we had some real good moments, especially from Højlund, and you just thought this guy could really make himself. I really hope that this back injury isn't I don't know if it's a reoccurring thing. Was it a thing at his previous club? I don't know, but I hope that it doesn't come back or he doesn't get injured again. Heaven forbid, because we need him to start gaining that momentum. Like, obviously, playing so well on Tuesday, playing again like that, hopefully on tomorrow. If he can get a goal and can just continue that momentum, he could be a real star. Going back to a few previous points, I think finding the word's disappointing that we are in a situation where we are having to reevaluate our playing style so early in the season. But I think that is purely down to the unprecedented amount of injuries that we didn't expect this early on. So I'm not in the camp of some United fans on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, that are calling for Ten Hag's head. I think for me, like John said, he needs to have a bad whole year before he needs to even be considered to be sacked. Because last year, we are overachieved, in my opinion, under a new manager, a new playing style, winning a cup and finishing in the top 4. That was a good season. So, brilliant. We didn't anticipate having this many injuries this early on. So we have had to reevaluate our whole transfer policy this summer because a lot of them went during the transfer window. And then having to play a midfielder at left back, he doesn't want to play left back, but he just wants to play. Fair enough. You can't argue that. We want him to be on the pitch. So I'm not excited about the game. I'm not disappointed. But we're just looking for that, like you say, positivity in those new players and just try and get some of these injuries back. That's the main situation, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a point I took out the other night as well is that I hope some fans don't get too expectant of Rasmus Højlund too soon and put too much pressure on his shoulders, because he's going to have great games like he did the other night, and then he's going to have games where he's absolutely dropping stinkers of 3s and 4s, and that's the life of a player at 20 years of age. There's no one to finish article. I remember Anthony Martial when he made his debut as well, and he absolutely flew onto the scene. He looked like an absolute world beater, and then his form just fell off a cliff really after that first season under LVG. So yeah, look, it'd be interesting to see. I just hope fans give him some breathing space. I think the honest and actual intelligent Man United fans will appreciate that he needs some time to bed in and not expect too much. But obviously, you'll have the fools on social media like they did with Garnacho last season, where he drops one bad game and they're absolutely jumping on him. Do you know what I mean? So he definitely needs support. Julio, Nathan kind of touched on my next point there when he was making his own point about Ten Hag's style of play and having to adjust a style of play so early into a season. It was evident that we spent a lot of money in the summer on Onana to change his style of play and adapt to this style of play we saw at Ajax. He brought in Mason Mount for a similar reason, and he brought in Rasmus Højlund for a similar reason, to play that high press and high intensity game that you can play out from the back. I mean, we saw it last season where he had to be pragmatic after the first 2 games, the 2 defeats against Brighton and Brentford. He had to tear up the blueprint and start again and play a style of football that he didn't necessarily want to play so soon. Do you think that he kind of has to do the same thing again this season with the injuries that we have and the situation we find ourselves in, to prioritise results? Or do you think he should persevere trying to play this style of football, take the hit with the results, the negative results, and hopefully it comes good by the end of the season? What way are you kind of leaning with that sort of thinking?
I'm always of the opinion where in some cases a manager needs to adapt, but when it comes to learning the style of play, no, I think he needs to continue, because he needs to. There's 2 reasons for this. The first one is you look at pretty much since December, for a long period of time until now, we've been playing almost every 3-4 days, and then include obviously the amount of travel we've done pre-season, the amount of games we played in pre-season. Then you look at the amount of injuries we've had now, lack of availability, or like take our forward line for example. Our players are either not fit, not in form, or just not available for whatever reason. Ten Hag has a lot on his plate. Obviously, he went pragmatic last season. Obviously, it was great. Finished 3rd, 2 finals, won a trophy. But couple all the fixture scheduling, the injuries, a hangover from the exhaustion from last season. Not much has changed in the squad, if we're being honest. There's not been this mass revamp of players that we thought might be the case this summer. It's all going to come ahead because pre-season is supposed to be a time where you're supposed to implement your style of play. The scheduling we had, but the time between games, including travel and maybe one training session between games, I don't think is enough time to implement what you want to do. And I think that's fed into the season a bit, because you look at the defense, for example. The defense seems to have forgotten the basics of defending, trying to play maybe a higher line. And as a result of that, they're getting cut open too easily. The midfield doesn't seem balanced, or doesn't seem to have legs, because either they're exhausted or they're trying to do positioning of certain kinds that Ten Hag's asking them to do. But then it's almost like they're doing too much with, for example, Mount and Bruno as 2 10s. And then Casemiro's just left isolated. And then Casemiro wants to go forward and do his thing as well. And then, like I've already said, with the forward line not fit or not in form or whatever. So I guarantee you that if Ten Hag sacked off all competitions this season, like say Chelsea don't have much to play for this season, say Ten Hag had just a full week every week, we would see a huge development. Ten Hag's not having almost a lot of time, especially the fact that he's having to just muster lineups based on scraps that he's got left. And a lot of these players still aren't what he wants. The other reason is I compare it to the Arteta case study. For example, Arteta's first 6 months won an FA Cup being pragmatic. His first full season, there wasn't a lot of investment anyway because of COVID. They finished 8th again, but they spent the whole year trying to adapt to what Arteta wanted. You had Martinelli and Saka and Smith Rowe given the time to play all season, and to develop into the wingers that they are today almost. And then the summer after, they spend 150 million pounds bringing in Ramsdale, Ben White, and other players who fit the philosophy more. Suddenly, they're challenging for top 4. Granted, they bottle it to Newcastle, but you could see they were more set. They were more of an Arteta team. And then last season, they went to another strength. They went another level. Okay, say we want about their title challenge, the fact that other teams had fallen off a little bit in comparison. Right now, they're looking like the real deal. You almost have to adapt with that, because back then as well, I think the season finished in July and it started again. What is it? Late September? It started again in 2020 when it was COVID. So Arteta didn't have much time with them either. At the same, you can kind of see where I'm trying to listen. Maybe I'm clutching at straws, but you see what I'm saying, that this build of style of play takes time. Guardiola went into a Manchester City team that was pre-built for 2-3 years before with players that would fit him. So it was very easy for those players to adapt to what he wanted, because it was almost like they were ready. That squad was ready-made, but not complete. So I think that I want Ten Hag to adapt in the sense of recruitment, but I think that should also come from the board. And I think that, listen, I'm all for adapting, but I think when it's something like this, you can't just start teaching them things and going, actually, you know what, scrap the syllabus, we're going elsewhere. Because we've been, we saw this in Louis' second season. We lost a lot of players. Not enough came in to replace those players. And then a lot of injuries. And then a lot of young and unproven players were playing. And, we went on that bad run between October to December where we couldn't score, at all, almost. From what we get from, this is in Louis' words, what he says post his time at United. We only have his words for this. His idea was the first 2 years at United, he wanted to make us difficult to beat, which he did. We had, I think, either the best or the second best clean sheet record with Daley Blind and Chris Smalling at centre-back. Not the partnership we were expecting post Ferdinand and Vidic. And he says that if he had the third season like he, had in his contract, we would have seen more free-flowing football. I think there is an element of that here. There was an element that with Arsenal a couple of years back. So I think these things take time. And like I said at the top of the show, we could finish 6th, but our play style could be more fluid, more what we want. But bear in mind as well, we don't have the personnel. Ralph Rangnick said we probably need 10 players, and then you probably want to get rid of other players and bring more in to fit the style of play. We don't have that at the moment. People are still raising questions about Delo and Lindelof, even though they're probably going to be playing this weekend. There's Donny van der Beek is still at the club. He's not getting a game, and I thought he was perfect for Ten Hag's style of play. So there's a lot at play here, but I think that when you look at it objectively, the bottom line is you bring a manager in to implement a style of play, and you're bringing him into a club with a squad full of players who a lot of the players haven't played that style of play. So it will take time. He needs the time. Obviously, if it gives it another year and there's still no significant improvement in style of play and we look just as lost, then maybe people should start asking questions. But right now, like I said, it seems like we're almost learning on the job almost. It's like we're going into match days and learning on those match days almost. So this will take time. It doesn't look like we're getting enough time between games to learn it. So it might take even longer. Who knows? But I think that with all the factors at play, I think he can't change what he wants to. He can adapt to little bits. For example, Manchester City's recruitment under Pep changed after a year because they wanted to bring in all those Spanish technical players that didn't have physicality, and then they adapted that. those are the kind of adaptations you want. If we had a competent board, we might have seen that this summer. But, I think the bottom line is, I think Ten Hag he can tweak a couple of bits to match the physicality and the demands of the Premier League. But in terms of his core foundation, he should continue to learn that, not start going pragmatic again, because it's what we've always done and we can't get out of this pattern.
Yeah, no, some good points there. I think the Arsenal example under Arteta is really good. I mean, if you remember, I think was it his first full season in charge, he went through a run of results, and I've never seen anything like it at a top level club. I think their only win in 14 or 15 games, ironically enough, was a 1-0 win at Old Trafford. So we were even worse at the time. But I mean, it's testament to sticking to a manager, sticking behind a philosophy, and like you said, in normal circumstances, Man United manager will struggle to implement their style in training purely based on the fact that we're nearly always in Europe. You're playing a game every 3 days, so it's very hard to get that training in between matches. And like you said, pre-season is key. And to be fair, I think we were kind of seeing a style of play being implemented in this pre-season. For me, where the wheels came off was when Kobe Mainoo got injured against Real Madrid. It just completely seemed to unravel a plan that Ten Hag was building. And that worries me in a sense, because as highly rated as I rate him and the coaches seem to rate him, it's a lot of pressure for an 18-year-old sitting in the engine room of Manchester United and being expected to plug that gap next to Casemiro. So I'm excited for him to come back. But like with Højlund, I really, really hope that we're not basing our whole future style of football on an 18-year-old's shoulders that's very unproven at this level. John, I'll just follow on from what Julia was saying there about style of play. A comment came in here, and it's something I've thought of myself. Ange Postecoglou walks into Spurs and turns it around before the season starts. I've noticed this myself. I see a lot of people have said that, look, Ten Hag still needs to get the right players in to play his style of football. But then you look at Ange coming in over the summer, and almost instantly Spurs are playing a level of football that we haven't seen in years, even under Pochettino. What are your thoughts on that?
It kind of weaves in kind of nicely because it's the same topic, although it does sort of go against a lot of what Julia was saying. But by the way, I thought he made some really good points regarding Arteta, and I've actually been making notes, partly also based on those Ange comments in the chat. By the way, hi Jake, thanks for joining us, and by the way, make sure you hit the like button, Jake, and subscribe to us. He's somebody who probably caught this show via a tweet I just sent out. But yeah, I'll actually come to that Ange point last in a list of things. I said 95% of what Julio said. Is it Julio or Julio? How am I saying it, by the way?
Julio.
Right, let's go British, Julio. I'll deal with the 5%, if you don't mind me, Julio, and then we'll come to all the other good stuff that you mentioned, and I'll weave it into the Ange comment. The Van Gaal thing sounds like BS to me, rather about making us difficult to beat over 2 years. We were a lot closer then than we are now. We'd only had a year since winning the Premier League title when he took over. Just a year before we won the title by 10 or 15 points. So coming from where we are now is completely different to where we were when he took over. And he spent an insane amount of money. And if you want to make us difficult to beat, don't buy Falcao. Don't buy Di Maria. And that's just off the top of my head. So
his words.
You know,
his
yeah,
words.
I know. But I don't. He had enough time. It didn't work. I didn't think it would work when we got him in on the basis of a penalty shootout win against Costa Rica. I thought that was odd, bearing in mind he'd done, in my opinion, very little in the previous 20 years. Yes, he had some good stuff at Ajax in the 90s, but 20 years of which you have stuff on your CV of failing at Barcelona, not once, but twice, and not taking the Netherlands to the World Cup, which is just, you just can't, in 2001, as it was in 2002 was the tournament. Yeah, his CV didn't deserve to get the job, in my opinion. That's Van Gaal. Everything else, I love what you had to say about Arteta. Arteta probably had double the amount of time to get things right to what Ten Hag, in fact, probably treble, actually, as you said. And there's a lot of, question marks, 8th and blowing the Champions League, etc., etc. But you're right to highlight that actually, if we had the season that Arsenal had last year in terms of getting closer to Man City, we'd be devastated that we couldn't get over the line, but there'd be lots of optimism, if you like, a bit like 91, 92 under Ferguson. And then we all know what happened after that. it then does weave in nicely with the Ange stuff, though, because there are a couple of caveats with the Ange stuff. I'm thinking of Brendan Rodgers in that year at Liverpool when they went close, and they just had, the Premier League to think about all season. And I think about how little time we had last season with playing in the Europa League and even having to play 2 extra matches against Barcelona and going so deep in the FA Cup and, of course, the League Cup, which we won. I mean, it was just an insane level of amount of football that we're having to play. And then injuries, of course, came along at the wrong time in March and April to the centre halves, especially. And we're just running on empty, in particular against Seville, and going 2-0 up there, but not being able to hang on. And I think that was the match where we lost at least one of our centre half, maybe even both. So there was a lot of asterisks and a lot of positivity about last season. But Ten Hag hasn't had the luxury that I would say that Ange has had and Brendan Rodgers had in the amount of time with the players that he would have liked, despite being there for a lot longer. And we're just 8 weeks in, okay? I've seen lots of managers have an impact after 6, 7, 8 weeks, and maybe a couple of fortunate results. Let's take the one, especially against Liverpool last week, and maybe to a lesser extent the one against Arsenal. That could easily have been 2 defeats, and suddenly it's like, oh, Spursy Spurs, And they didn't have a great result in the opening day, and yet there was all this positivity there. I think they drew 2-2, and there was all this positivity around them. And I thought, really, what's going on here? I think there's a native English speaker that the media tend to warm to whenever they take over a big club. We've seen it before with whether it be Frank Lampard or whether it be to some extent Brendan Rodgers. But whenever they get Harry Redknapp, for sure, they all get a nice go at it, especially if they've managed, somewhere else like Celtic and stuff. And right now there's all this positivity in the media, and it can actually even have an effect on the club and the team, and everyone kind of believes in it. But let's just see where they're at in 18 months, okay? Because that's what we're really interested in. Whether they play well over 6 weeks is one thing, but can they play well over 6 months is far more important. So yeah, that's where I am on that one. I still think that Ten Hag has done so many good things over the last 15 months. And I'm also with Julio as well in that I do think we've got to stick with it. If Van Gaal kind of changed his philosophy, if that's what it was, for those first 2 years, I think what you had with Ten Hag last season was a goalkeeper that wasn't playing the way he wanted to play. And I guess that's one of the issues as well right now, is maybe Ten Hag's reign will ultimately be dependent on Onana. You spend a lot of money like that on a goalkeeper at the beginning of your tenure or in the first year of your tenure. It's not like Ferguson, who then, okay, he brought in Jim Leighton, didn't work, but then of course we've got Schmeichel, and he could have 3 or 4 duffers after Schmeichel. He got the next one right, and you've got 2 decades pretty much of good goalkeeping success. But I do think that the Onana thing probably does have to work, and I do think it still may work. I'm not as... of course, I'm concerned, and I want it to get better, and he may have another howler in the next 3 weeks, but I would persevere, and I would persevere with this style of play, and I do think that we've been unlucky with the results this season and the injuries.
Yeah, I agree with you, John, especially with the persevering with Onana. I think if you're going to drop him, it's just going to give the media more ammunition. It's just going to pile the pressure on him. And I know we can talk about competition. That young goalkeeper we brought in the summer from Turkey looks a decent keeping, but at the same time, is it going to absolutely shatter Onana's confidence then? By looking at the style of play, he's a confidence player. He needs that arrogance, that air about him. You saw with Inter Milan, he was the best player in that Champions League final against Man City a few months ago, and that's what really impressed me about him. So that player is still in there, and like we've touched on, very unlucky with injuries and in the department that's most important to a keeper, which is it's right in front of you. Do you know what I mean? How different would the opening of his career at Man United have been if he had that back four of Wan-Bissaka, Varane, Lisandro Martinez and Luke Shaw in front of him consistently for the first 5, 6, 7 weeks of the season? Look, we won't know, but look, I'm like you, John. I'd be 100% back him, persevere with him. I think he's a very good goalkeeper, and I think he's intricate to how Ten Hag wants to play. And similarly, I do have that concern about Angie as well. I think it's that new manager bounce. I think Spurs are fortunate enough not to be in Europe as well, so they've had less matches to F up in typical Spurs style. So yeah, no, I'd definitely be in the same ballpark as you. I've been impressed with how he has been playing, but like you said, it'll be interesting to see where they are in 18 months' time. But Julio, I'll come to you now looking towards the game tomorrow. Off the back of that Galatasaray game, as we've touched on, a few negatives, a few very, very good positives as well. It's another home game. We would have been reveling in this home game last season because of our home form. This year, it's gone the other way. Our home form it has become abysmal. What are you hoping to see in this Brentford game tomorrow? I mean, because we've spoke about this so many times on different shows the last few weeks. We want this bounce, we want the reaction. It's not coming. So, what do you want to see? Not so much in lineup, but in terms of style of play, attitude. What do you want to see in the Brentford game tomorrow?
I'm hoping Brentford stick to their bad form and don't actually turn up tomorrow. It seems that everyone could be in bad form and then they come to us and think, oh, we might actually win here. This might be a good game for us, because I think Brentford have won. I think they've only won once, and I think that was in August. I could be wrong on that one, but it's been a while since they've had a win, and they've not been at their best at the moment. But we're early into the season, and I don't think it's exactly panic stations yet. We don't know what's happening. I mean, they're without their main striker, but Mbermo seems to turn up in moments for them instead. The key thing is obviously, like, I don't know what I'm expecting tomorrow. I said this at the start of the show, and I'll maintain that you don't know what you're going to get with this United team. I could see us winning 2-1 tomorrow with Højlund getting a winner, but then I could see us bottling that in the final minutes of the game on a set piece. I think if Brentford are going to attack us, I think it's probably going to be in a set piece, or when they're going to cut us open, I don't know, down the left, down the right. I don't know, because we just seem to be getting cut open way too easily. Like, we'll have our good moments. I think going forward, we looked really good against Galatasaray, but going back the other way, we just almost brought it on ourselves. And I just think that I'm hoping we don't see that, but realistically, I don't think that's going to change in 2 or 3 days, So I think that we'll probably see a similar performance and maybe hope we can grind out a win if we can.
Yeah, Brentford, it's one of those games, isn't it? It's a real banana skin fixture, especially for United in recent seasons. I mean, if you think back to the game last year away at Brentford, we were almost like the phoenix rising from the flames after that 4-0 defeat. We went on that run, and it was kind of the rebirth of Man United, the infamous having them run a certain amount of kilometres, and Ten Hag supposedly joining them in that run, and it just kind of got that whole dressing room back singing off the same hymn sheet. But yeah, here we are now facing another must-win game tomorrow, ironically enough, against Brentford. And, it could potentially be another rebirth of the team if we do get a win. John, what are your feelings ahead of the game tomorrow? Do you agree with Julio in the sense that it's hard to know what to expect from the team, or what's your thoughts ahead of the game?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very difficult to analyze at the moment, because it was just a week ago that we were all sat here, pretty content with our performance against Palace in the cup, and with obviously Palace not at full strength for that match, but nor were United, and us going into the match with Palace on the Saturday thinking this could be the beginning of a good 6 weeks. We looked at the fixtures on the horizon with Galatasaray and Copenhagen twice, plus some softer on paper Premier League matches, including that one last week and the one tomorrow against Brentford. And yet here we are a week later, and of course we've suffered back-to-back defeats in different circumstances. And I think what Julio, in the sort of in between the lines I was reading with Julio as well, is that I don't think we can just trust ourselves to keep clean sheet at the moment. So that's making it difficult straight away, that, you're going to have to outscore the opposition, so to speak, just like we had, even, whether it be Bayern away scoring 3 or 2 the other night, or the soft goal we conceded from a set piece. Again, that was kind of touched on there by Julio against Palace last week. So we are sort of, probably going to have to score 2 or 3 goals to win that match tomorrow at the very least. I do think we're capable, and we were capable, as we saw it with 11 men on Tuesday. And if we had kept 11 men on the pitch, who knows how that match may have panned out. It may well have been a 3-2 dramatic win for us, and we're riding a crest of the wave. And I also like the comment from Jake about Højlund's second being kind of Ruud van Nistelrooy vibes, because that's exactly what I tweeted. As soon as I saw that goal, I was like, this was sort of Van Nistelrooy-esque. And I think Højlund is faster than even Van Nistelrooy was. But there was a goal he scored at Highbury when he sort of just dinked it over the foot of Martin Keown and then just bared down on goal and dinked it over the keeper as well. That was a bigger goal because it was basically, in a way, a title decider, if you like, that we ended up drawing. But it was a good point for us and not a good point for Arsenal. And we actually went on to win the league. And in fact, Ferguson went on the pitch like this, celebrating at the end of the match as a sort of this was a better point for us than it was for you kind of vibe. And it did turn out that way as we went on to win the league. So I think it's Højlund that we've actually got the most, along with the injuries, as being hang on a second, this is a huge reason why we're looking so vulnerable, especially at the back, but also positivity going forward. In fact, last season, it was the other way around, certainly for that, that really good, strong period when we were getting goals, but maybe winning 1 or 2-0 before the collapse to that lot. And we were looking pretty solid at the back, especially with Varane and Martinez fit. So it's kind of but at times we were like, are we going to get a goal today? It's going to be difficult. I remember away at Newcastle being one of those games where it just sort of didn't really look like we were going to score, and we didn't. And there was a few of those as well last season. But actually, we are looking good going forward. I mean, we had chances, and there was a few bobbles around the box last week against Palace that could have gone either way. We could have scored 3, 4, 5 on Tuesday. So there's that positivity. And I'm just going to finish with a couple of comments I've seen in the chat about Spursy and having a laugh about it. And just to explain for anyone who's not sure, this comment about lads, it's Tottenham is a story that's been told by Roy Keane, where we would go to Tottenham and it was kind of like, on paper it was going to be a tricky one away, but we had a good reputation against them away. I mean, I barely remember losing to them in all the successful seasons of Ferguson. And even when it did look like one year we were going to lose to them because we were 3 down at half time, we still came back to win 5-3. And the comment that Keane made was one time, on one of those successful occasions, there was not even a team talk from Ferguson. He just walks in and says, lads, it's Tottenham, and walks out again. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely unreal. Typical Ferguson. But yeah, touching back on the game tomorrow, I agree. I think clean sheets are definitely at a premium at the moment, especially at Old Trafford. And I think we have got 2 or 3 goals in us for sure tomorrow, but I really just hope that Brentford don't score the first goal, because psychologically you can see this team at the minute, they're on the floor, and if a goal goes in tomorrow, I think the shoulders are going to slouch again, and Brentford will sit back and make it really, really difficult for United again. And I think if they do score first tomorrow, it's going to make Old Trafford team, and that does affect the players as well, in the long run. So look, I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we just do well going forward and hopefully see a clean sheet tomorrow. It would be nice before the international break to close it off with a win, just to take away for the next 2 weeks for the players to come back with a bit of a pep in their step. I suppose that brings us nicely then onto predicted 11. So Julia, what would you be thinking then tomorrow? Would you be ruthless and look at dropping the likes of the out of form players, the Brunos, Marcus Rashfords, Onana? Or are you in the camp of, no, leave them in there, they've proven their worth, let them play themselves back into form, the cream always rises to the top? What are your thoughts on your starting 11 then tomorrow?
One stat I'd actually like to bring up first, actually, because even though we're very flaky in terms of if we concede a goal, it doesn't look like we're getting back into the game. I think Brentford have lost the most points this season from winning positions. So I don't want to give us any false hope. But the idea of maybe us not being able to get back into the game against Brentford, it depends whether, because Thomas Frank sometimes likes to go with a 5-3-2 or a 4-3-3. So I think it could be dependent on that for tomorrow. On the predicted 11, I think it would be ridiculous to state that Rashford or Bruno should be dropped. I think because even though they're out of form, some players stay in to play out of that bad form and into good form. And I think that we've seen our drop in quality when the likes of Bruno don't play. So And I think Ten Hag will look at it as like, if there's ever a moment, I can see one of those two pulling up with that moment, coming in clutch when needed. We saw that a lot last season. I think 60-70% of our goals last season came with them involved in some way. In terms of 11, I'd personally like us to see us. I'd like to see us field the same 11 we saw against Galatasaray. But if there is going to be a change, I see it being one of Mount or Mabry to come out of the team and Anthony to come in, and we revert back to more of a 4-2-3-1 as opposed to a 4-4-2 with a diamond. But I just personally, I'd rather keep the same what we had because it looked good going forward. It did. It's just at the back. I mean, people obviously joke about how much the Glazers spend, and we can get technical about Glazers don't spend anything the club does. But even the amount of money we've spent, we can't buy a clean sheet at the moment. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I think we'll see something very similar tomorrow. It's tomorrow, isn't it? We play them. I think we'll see something similar to what we saw against Galatasaray in terms of lineup.
John, do you echo Julio's sentiments? I know you touched earlier on about leaving the likes of Bruno and Rashford in there, letting them play themselves back into form. Is there any other changes you'd like to see in the 11 tomorrow? What's your thoughts?
I think there's sort of two ways of answering this question, as there always is. There's sort of trying to second guess Ten Hag, and I think Julio may be right. It'll be very similar to the one that started against Galatasaray, perhaps with the exception of Hannibal. I think that he came off at half time, and I actually think the substitution was the right one to make at 1-1, and I think it was working very well for us as we took a 2-1 lead. And I thought Eriksen actually was one of the few players that did perform well, and I think it was one of the few players that I gave a 7 or above to in the analysis on this show afterwards, or at least in the live chat. But of course, when you go down to 10 men, and it's very quickly as well, it's 2-2, and then obviously later on 2-3, and we're down to 10 men. Eriksen's probably not the person you need in there, but it was the right decision, I think, to do it at the right time. And actually, it did transform us into being a much more potent outfit, I thought, in that 20 minutes in the second half, or 30 minutes before we went down to 10 men. Although Eriksen, for me, doesn't start tomorrow, despite that good substitute appearance. But I think it'll be very similar, as Julio said. I've gone for the diamond. This is my lineup as opposed to what I think will go on. I've gone for Onana in goal. As I said, I would stick with him. I would actually rejig the defense, but to be honest with you, whatever permutation you go at the back, they're almost all wrong, if you like. They've almost all got weaknesses and holes in them right now, just because of the lack of personnel available. But I've gone for Evans at right back and Dalot at left back, just to sort of get Amrabat and Casemiro into a midfield sort of 2, or as it will be for me, a diamond tomorrow, just to see how that, which I think is ultimately how I think Ten Hag wants to go, to see how Casemiro perform when he's a bit freer and not got all that burden of being the only holding midfielder, if you like. So I'm going to go with those two tomorrow, and I don't think that's necessarily a defensive option, because I think Casemiro can bomb forward a lot more liberally. I'm actually going to bring in, the controversy doesn't end there, by the way. I'm going to bring in Maguire at centre half. I think Lindelof has been poor. I think Varane has been poor, but Varane's ceiling is higher, and is clearly the senior defender amongst those two, with him and Lindelof in comparison. So on if you just had never seen either play before, you'd say equally poor, both of them at times. They have been left vulnerable, but I'm bringing in Maguire just because I don't think Maguire or Lindelof, I know Maguire's got mistakes in him too, but I think that if that was Maguire playing those 5 or 6 games as badly as Lindelof has played, in my opinion, Maguire will be out of the team, and I'll bring him in. I'm not saying that he's the future or he's the answer. It's the answer for me tomorrow, that those level of performances from Victor Lindelof is not acceptable. You could argue the same about Onana and all the rest of it, but Onana's been with the club 6 weeks, not 6 years. So there is a big difference there. I'm going for a diamond in midfield, as I said, with Amrabat, Casemiro. I'm going to go for Mason Mount as well, just because he was, again, one of probably only 3 players that got that 7 or above the other night. I thought he was fantastic, best match for the club so far. And I think that deserves to be rewarded, not punished, if you like, by maintaining his place. And I'm going to stick with Bruno. I can see the arguments for dropping him, sure, because his form of late hasn't been good enough. But he's more than capable of, creating a couple of goal-scoring opportunities and even getting on the score sheet himself tomorrow, and especially against opposition such as Brentford. And the reason I'm going for these final 2, I mean, Højlund, obviously, but the reason I'm going with Rashford alongside is kind of just because of that diamond, in that I think Garnacho is an unlucky absence, if you like, from this team. And I think but there's many days and many matches very, very soon for me that he will be in my starting 11. I just think because I'm going for the diamond, I sort of need 2 players that are pretty comfortable in a central position and out wide, as we saw with Højlund as well, cutting in on that second goal the other day. So for me, that would be my lineup in a sort of 4-4-2, but as that midfield 4 is a diamond.
Yeah, very interesting, John. Actually, yeah, I'd probably 90% agree with that team, which I 100% agree with putting Dalot at left back. It's been an obvious weakness now the last couple of weeks, and I think he just kind of shores up that side of the pitch and makes Brentford kind of have to maybe rejig their game plan, because I'm sure they'll come to Old Trafford tomorrow, target that left-hand side, assuming that Amrabat will start there. So yeah, it kind of throw the cat amongst the pigeons there. The only change I'd probably make from your 11 would be I'd put Lindelof at right back ahead of Evans. I just wouldn't like to see Evans at full back at this stage of his career. He came on a full back in the pre-season game in Dublin against Bilbao, and Jesus, it was absolutely awful. It was carnage for 5 minutes. I felt so sorry for him. So
I didn't see that match, but so yeah. I mean, like I said, you could pick holes. I'm clutching big style at straws. I'm on the Titanic and I've just seen a piece of paper or something and I'm grabbing hold of it.
Yeah, look, it's just a situation we find ourselves in. We just don't have the luxury of options at the moment. Even if players are out of form, you're kind of stuck with them at the minute. And, I was disappointed to hear that Reguilon was still injured today, because I thought he's actually started quite well at the club. He's been one of the positives the last few weeks. And I was disappointed when he got injured. I never, ever thought I'd say those words when we signed him on loan on deadline day, but there you go. But that brings us nicely on to score predictions then. Julio, I'll go back to you again. What is your score prediction tomorrow and first goal scorer?
You know what? I'm going to back United for a 2-1 win. I think Højlund will score the first goal, but I wouldn't be surprised if we balls it up into a 2-2.
John, do you agree with that sentiment?
Nah. And I'm not an optimist. I said it to someone earlier, but I honestly am not. I'm actually more of a pessimist. But I actually think we will win tomorrow. And I've gone crazy. I'm going 4-1.
Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking probably 3-1 myself. I think we'll go 2-0 up. I think Brentford will snatch a goal back, but then I think we'll finish the game off. I think we'll let Garnacho goal. I fancy Højlund myself to get that first goal again tomorrow. He's just in form, and I really hope he keeps it up tomorrow, because he's a joy to watch. He's not only a good finisher at the minute, he's actually a really nice player to watch. His footwork and his pace, it's refreshing to have a number 9 that can do that sort of thing at the club. I'm sick of looking at the other Haaland across the city, so it's nice to have our own Højlund to be excited about at the minute. But yeah, look, I think that kind of wraps up the show nicely. Jens, thank you so much for helping me through this first time hosting the show. I didn't bring on any controversial tweets, so we got through that part okay. Just before we finish up, I just like to mention as well, like, Lady Cathy Ferguson passed away there today. What a blow that is to the Ferguson family. I think any United fan worth their salt will know what that woman, her contribution is to Manchester United Football Club. She was the reason Ferguson was as successful as he was. He said that himself, and a lot of United fans don't realise that she was the one who convinced him to reconsider his retirement in 2002. So look, the thoughts of everyone at the show with the Ferguson family at the minute, it's a big loss, and thoughts with Sir Alex at the moment. So, but look, I mean, before we head off, as I said, Julio, your hand is there on Twitter. John, is there any books you want to promote before you leave? Because I know you like to get your little word in about your books on every show. So
just the one, although there are two copies there behind me. Even the Defeats is the book I wrote, all about how basically Ferguson would use losses, bad moments, bad periods, even to basically lead us to unbelievable success on on a frequent basis over his 26 years at the club. So there is always a silver lining. There was always a silver lining to every cloud under his tenureship, but sadly that hasn't been the case in the decade since. I do just want to have a quick word, if that's okay, on Kathy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many little stories that are connected to the club. There's even some sort of old sort of video footage that you'll find, I think, from one of Steve Bruce's, sort of goes with a big video camera, and I think there's a bit with Kathy in the kitchen, and her interaction with Ferguson of knowing exactly what was going on in the football world. Of course, you couldn't be married to Ferguson and not know what was going on, but kind of bringing him down to earth with a bump, if you like, after maybe some bad results, if you like, and just like, yeah, well, still got to do the dishes, and and the effect that she had. I mean, he glowingly spoke about her when the statue went up, because she was part of the whole rigmarole, I think, to keep it a secret. And yeah, obviously, as you touched on as well, in 2001, Christmas 2001, when he'd already said he was going to retire at the end of that season, she was instrumental in saying, what are you going to do? I know the other members of the family were key too, and they woke him up on Christmas Day in the afternoon after lunch snooze. But she's like, we don't want you around the house. Get back to work for another decade or so. So, we have to be very thankful, and it's just, I only just found out the news just before we went on air, actually. So very sad, and thoughts with the Ferguson family at this time.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to end the show. Look, guys, if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel. The guys will be back then tomorrow for the review of the Brentford game. Hopefully it's positive news, and hopefully we can take 3 points into the international break. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you soon.